Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back after lunch. Now, this afternoon's session is on matter 7F, which is in relation to the village, the large village of Ingatestone, as it's deemed within the submitted plan. And my name is Yvonne Wright, and I'm one of the inspectors appointed to examine this plan along with Mr. Warden. Now, I'm leading the session this afternoon, but Mr. Warden may well come in on the discussions. Mr. Warden, would you just like to say hello?
Good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. Now, there are a few participants in the room who haven't been present in the sessions before, but I'm not proposing to do any introductory elements in terms of housekeeping, because I know that Ms. Feeney has given guidance on use of hands and cameras and microphones, etc. Just to let all participants know that, subject to how long we've got 3 sites that we're going to be going through this afternoon, how long that takes. If necessary, we'll be having a break, but I certainly see this session not going any longer than at least 4 o'clock, but I anticipate sooner than that. But we will just see how the discussions go. Now, before we actually just start on the discussions in relation to the sites themselves, I just wanted to appraise everybody of some changes that have been being made to the hearing programme. Now, because of some of the discussions that we've had this week in relation to site allocations and additional notes and evidence that the council is going to be providing us, we have made the decision to move matter 8, which was supposed to be held next Tuesday. We're now going to hold that in March instead, because that's quite a pertinent matter to be discussing nearer the end of the hearing sessions, because we will be going through the trajectory, the housing land supply in its entirety, looking at 5-year housing land supply, etc., etc. So additional information that the council is providing to us by the middle of February could well impact upon what is discussed in that session. So we are going to move it to week commencing the 8th of March. Now, I'm not going to give a definitive date at the moment. It'll be either on the Tuesday, Wednesday or the Thursday of that week. I will be amending the timetable as soon as possible, the programme, and get that out. So if it's not out today, it may well be out over the weekend, or certainly by Monday, the absolute latest, but I hope to get that out today. Please also note, anybody listening in, it may not be relevant for participants of this session, but anybody listening in, there are also some changes to the programme for next week in relation to retail, which is matter 11. That is now going to be held in the afternoon on that day rather than in the morning, just to give some additional time for consideration of matter 10 and some more time for consideration of matter 11 in the afternoon, which means that the environment session, or the first part of the environment session, will now be held. That's going to just be moved onto the Friday. So we'll have an entire day on the Friday that we'll be looking at environment. Now, Ms. Feeney will be sending out to the relevant participants to let them know what changes are going to be made. So I hope that that doesn't cause any issues to anybody listening in, or if it does, then please contact Ms. Feeney and we may be able to fit you in on another session so that you can have your say on relevant points. So as I said, we will try and get that revised programme out as soon as possible, hopefully a little bit later today. Thank you very much. Now, I'm proposing to go through the sites in order. So we're going to start with the 2 housing sites, starting with R21, R22, and then going to the employment site, which is EO8. Is everybody happy with that order? Yeah. Okay. Can we turn then first to policy R21? And it could be as I said, I think I mentioned this when we combined some of the policies for the villages in Kelford and Hatch, and in terms of combining our questions for Kelford and Hatch and for Blackmore, that we would that yes, we've combined our questions, but it doesn't mean that we will that the sites are linked in any way or anything like that. Before we just start, so I've just been reminded, can we do introductions? Because as I said, there are some people in the room that haven't been here before. So can I start with the council, please, giving their introductions?
Yes, good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Paul Shedderevian, QC, and I'm acting for the council.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Inspector Phil Drain, Director of Planning and Economy, Brentwood Borough Council.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Inspector Jonathan Quilter, Strategic Planning Manager at Brentwood Council.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Inspector. It's Tom Huang, Senior Policy Planner, Brentwood Borough Council.
Thank you. And then I've got, have I got a representative for Calla Homes, please?
Good afternoon, Inspector James Delafield from JB Planning Associates.
Thank you. Hallmark Care Homes.
Good afternoon, Paul Brailsford, Head of Planning at Freeths.
Lovely, thank you. Redrow, please. Redrow Homes.
Good afternoon, everybody. Nikki Parsons from Pegasus Group, representing Redrow Homes.
Thank you. And Essex County Council, please.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Brendan Johnson, Essex County Council, the local highway authority.
Thank you. Is there anybody else present in the meeting that hasn't introduced themselves? No. Thank you. Thank you for that. Can I start by getting the council to introduce site R21? If we can look at these sites, I said we'll look at them individually. If in relation to R21 and R22, if it's similar wording in relation to either introducing the sites or the next question, which is going to be the contribution of the site and the exceptional circumstances in relation to removing these sites from the greenbelt, I don't mind if you do put those together if you wish. So I'll leave that up to yourselves. So Mr. Quilter, please.
Thank you, Inspector. Yes, so if I start with site R21, so known as land south of Ingatestone. As the name suggests, this is to the south of the settlement of Ingatestone, and the site itself is a triangle of land situated between the main railway line and the A12. In between, I would obviously mention that there is the effectively the sort of the main road, Roman road, that is in between the A12 and the site as well. So that sort of feeds into the slip road on the A12. But in any case, there is the main road obviously on that boundary on the northwestern side. The site, in terms of its current uses, there is the former Ingatestone Garden Centre, which has been not been in active use for a number of years. So that's situated to the north of the site, to the rear of properties along Burnt House Lane. And the access for that is off of the Roman Road that I just mentioned. The southern parcel of the site that comprises a number of sort of uses. There is some greenfield land on there, and there is some sort of operations in terms of open storage that have taken place there as well. But broadly speaking, obviously the site is available for development. In terms of the exceptional circumstances, I will go through them in turn. Apologies, there probably will be some similarities just the way I've prepared my notes.
That's
but
fine.
Yeah, no worries. So in terms of R21, the residential development site was assessed in the Greenbelt study as having a low to moderate impact. I would just differentiate there in terms of obviously, as I mentioned, there are two parcels effectively, and they were assessed as low to moderate in respect of site 128, which is the Ingatestone Garden Centre, and the land to the south of that 106, as it was originally referred to as moderate impacts on the Greenbelt purposes overall. So residential development on the site is considered to be appropriate given its location to the south of Ingatestone, a large village. The impact on openness of the development of this site would be limited by the hard boundaries of the railway lines and the roads that surround it. Given the limited impact on the openness and strong boundaries that contain the site from the wider rural setting, it's considered that this site has limited function in terms of achieving Greenbelt objectives. Therefore, the specific local level characteristics of these sites are considered to justify their selection for release from the Greenbelt. Apologies, Inspector. Did you say you wanted me to come on to R22, or do you want to deal with that?
No, if you were just giving this exactly the same for each site, then you could have done them together. But let's just deal with R21 first, and then we'll start at the beginning for R22. I think that's going to be simpler.
Okay.
So thank you for that. So can we just come to have a look at the site capacity that's set out in the plan? And in relation to R21, it states around 161 new homes on this site. So, and I think in your hearing statement, I'm just directing this to the council at the moment. You've set out that well, you refer to both sites actually, but let's just refer to R21. But in your hearing statement, you state that the development sites are on the edge of the village where low densities are considered to be appropriate. But then you say that R21 has a density of 34 dwellings per hectare based on developable net developable area. So that seems a slight contradiction in terms there, in terms of a low, because that's more of a standard sort of dwelling per hectare. But nevertheless, it's more about whether the density and the number of homes on that site is appropriate. Can the council just explain how they came to that sort of density on that site and whether it fits with the locality and the character, because we've talked about the other village areas in that context, please?
Of course, yeah. Apologies, Inspector. I think I probably misused the words there in terms of the way I've described that. But okay. I think by all means, I think, yeah, the densities that were being brought forward in these locations are felt to be appropriate for their location. In terms of the immediate locality, yes, we are talking about a village, but obviously in terms of the settlement hierarchy, one of the service villages is obviously in terms of Ingatestone. Its location is nearby to a train station, hence that classification. And there have been some recent, in terms of further north of the site, I'm situated between both of the sites, there have been some higher density developments that have taken place. So I think if you're looking at a wider area, certainly the average may well be slightly lower than what's being proposed, but by all means we feel that that's compatible in respect of firstly maximising the use of greenbelt land and also reflecting what has come forward in that local area over time. So certainly I think although accept that there are, I think as we've set out in our hearing statement for site R21, we said that there's on average 34 dwellings per hectare, and for site R22, 46 dwellings per hectare. We still feel that that is a compatible density that could be achieved in this location, with the context obviously of Ingatestone being able to accommodate development, obviously in line with the fact that it's a service village.
Thank you for that. Does anybody else have any comments they want to bring in around just site capacity? I'm going to move on and just consider the trajectory in relation to delivery of the site next, and then come on to any specific sites in relation to the proposed changes. You can just bear with me. My documents have just disappeared, so just bear with me while I just pull them back up. Right, there we go. Yes, and then we'll just have a look at what the specific policy states, and taking on board or considering the council's suggested changes on that. Ms Parsons, please.
Thank you, Madam. It was just to say, you'll have seen from our hearing statement that Redrow actually has a planning application running on its part of the site, 128. That application is for up to 110 properties, leaving the remainder of the allocation to the land to the south. And assuming you use the gross area at the moment, because we don't know what the scheme's going to look like, that would give you a density of 18 dwellings per hectare on the land to the south, which is obviously as you start to go back towards the green belt. So you've got the opportunity there to grade the development through the development management process such that the density is appropriate to this edge of settlement location.
And in relation to the Redrow owned or Redrow part of this site, that density, what would that be if it's proposed for 110 dwellings?
That's 32 dwellings per hectare.
And I'm aware you've just finished an inquiry.
Yes,
on that particular site. I am aware of that, but obviously
yes.
that doesn't influence any of this process. But yes, interesting timing. Let's put it that way. Right, thank you for that. That's actually really helpful to just give that clarity there. So in relation, can we just move on to the actual trajectory then and what's proposed? Because for this site, I know R22 there's proposed change, but for this site there isn't a proposed change. To obviously a planning application is in, it's at appeal, it's going through an inquiry at the moment. Whatever that decision will be will obviously influence when the site, if and when the site comes forward. So can the council just explain, or maybe it is Ms Parsons, or with the assistance of Ms Parsons, to just explain, well, the council, you can explain the entire site in terms of its delivery. Obviously, Ms Parsons can only refer to the Redrow site. Could you just explain the reasonings for the trajectory for R21, please?
That's fine. Yes, thank you, Inspector. So the in terms of the trajectory as it's set out, I'll deal with that first. Obviously, at the moment, that's setting out that the site would commence development in the 2021-22 period, and that would be 50 and 60 homes, and that would be the Garden Centre Redrow Homes site, and then the remainder in the 23-24 period would be the 51 units made up of the remainder of the allocation. I mean, in terms of the earlier start time, obviously, from the perspective of the parties, in terms of the promoters, their view is that the site could come forward at an earlier stage. Obviously, on the notwithstanding obviously any applications as and when they will be determined, but certainly from our perspective, it's got to be in line with the plan process. But there's obviously bearing in mind obviously our views on other sites with regards to start times and expected adoption of the plan. Any further questions on that? But I'm happy for in terms of if you want to raise that in terms of Ms Parsons, obviously in respect of the
if we can go through, yeah, thank you, Mr Quilty. If we can just go through the part of the site that isn't under Redrow's ownership or option, or first to just understand. Obviously, you've put it into the third year, or 2023-24. Can you just explain the planning status on that site? Any pre-application discussions, planning applications coming forward, etc.?
So there's not necessarily been any pre-application discussions. Obviously, have been discussions with the promoters, and in terms of the expectation, obviously, of as we mentioned earlier about the lower density, the difference between the densities of the two sites, recognising obviously this does come down to a sort of a thin end of a wedge, I suppose, in terms of the way that the site's site boundary. Yeah, literally. So I think there's obviously going to be more limited opportunities to put specific residential dwellings in those locations. I think there'll be more ancillary open space uses or whatever they may be, but obviously the details would need to be worked through. But certainly obviously in terms of the timeframes that we'd be looking at for 2023-24, it would obviously, as with other sites of a similar nature, would expect an application to be advanced in line with the plan being adopted, and then development to be brought forward at that stage. But we do obviously accept that there's not necessarily a developer but an actual developer, obviously, at the moment with an option on bringing that forwards, it's certainly the landowner that's the active party.
Okay, thank you. Can I bring in Ms. Parsons, please, because you might give me some more information in relation to the Redrow land. Is that an option still, or is it owned?
That's been owned since 2017. So Redrow Homes have owned that for quite some time, and obviously, as a piece of land in their portfolio, they're very keen for it to be developed. Hence the application that's running at the moment. I can tell you they're primed and ready. I'm literally holding back diggers, so they are very ready to start delivering.
Thank you. So in terms of any site constraints, so I'll put this to obviously to yourself, Ms. Parsons, in relation to the Redrow part of the site, and then I'll come to Mr. Quilter in relation to the rest of the site. In terms of any site constraints, any site issues?
Nothing out of the ordinary. We have ecological issues on the site to be dealing with. We've got dormice and other things. We've got some reptiles to be dealing with. Nothing out of the ordinary for a development site such as this. We've already, I say we, Redrow Homes, I'm not obviously Redrow, have already funded and carried out archaeological works. So those sorts of pre-commencement activities have already been taking place through the planning application process. There's been all of the various technical studies. All of those have been submitted, noise, traffic, design, everything's gone into the local authority and has been assessed by the relevant parties. So we're very far ahead of where we need to be. And through that work, we've identified what are the constraints for development, and none of them are anything out of the ordinary.
So you said you're that Redrow is ready and sort of primed to go as soon as, and obviously we are not involved in the inquiry at all. That's a completely different inspector that's dealing with that, and we have no knowledge of it. We're not involved in it at all. If I'll play devil's advocate, if that is not approved, does that impact on the deliverability of this site in terms of the trajectory? Would it push anything back? As in, if Redrow would then have to wait until the plan was adopted, for instance, as some other developers have portrayed in earlier sessions or other site allocation sessions. How would that impact on the trajectory? I'm just trying to understand whether 50 houses basically this year going into 2022, early 2022, is deliverable.
If we are dismissed, we have submitted evidence to that inquiry to say that there would be a 12-month delay in delivery, assuming that the plan is adopted in the timetable that the local authority have indicated.
Obviously, you may not get dismissed. We don't have no idea at this stage.
I think what we can say is Redrow Homes has put everything in place to deliver as quickly as possible in line with the trajectory. A lot of the matters now are outside of its hands. It's done as much as it can.
And in relation to Redrow delivering 50 houses and then 60 houses, each of those in 1 year, is obviously Redrow is a big house builder name in the a player in that field. Any issues with that in terms of delivering that number of homes in one location?
None whatsoever. As I've said earlier, Redrow Homes have been holding this site since 2017. So this is going out of their balance sheets year on year, or month on month, actually. So it's very important to them to start delivering quickly. All resources have been thrown at this, and they will be thrown at it once a permission is in place.
Okay. Thank you for that. Can I bring in Mr. Johnston, please, just to confirm in relation to R21, the Highway Authority's comments in relation to access and any issues or not, as you see, for delivery of that site?
No. I mean, we've recommended approval of the Redrow site. And the existing accesses and such like. So So we don't envisage any issue at all with that.
Okay, thank you. And just to confirm, so that I'm clear, in relation to the 2 parcels of land, if Redrow comes first, where would access come for the southern part of the site? Is that through the Redrow site, or would that have an additional access?
There's already existing additional access which feeds into the recycling area, which is just to the south of the Redrow site.
So it's already got that.
So it already has an access. It's a slightly unconventional access, is probably fair to say, but it doesn't, it's an existing access.
I think I might be wrong, but the road is called the Hillway. I think there's an access road that leads to the very southern parcel of that site, but in effect, yes, that runs in that same position. So,
thank you. I haven't got any further questions on R21. Obviously, again, we will be asking the council for further information in relation to exceptional circumstances, but other than that, so unless anybody has anything further they wish to add for that particular site, I just wanted to just quickly run through the policy changes, not in relation to the site development and that element. If I can just have a look at those to just make sure. Ms. Parsons, please.
It was just to simply add for your notes, Madam, that you're absolutely right. Obviously, you're not involved in the inquiry, but just so you are aware, the council, the officers of which are here today, can confirm that the only matter that the council has taken in the appeal is the fact that the site is in the green belt. There are no other conflicts identified by the council. It's just the fact that it's in the green belt.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
I'm happy to confirm that, Inspector, on the basis of the slightly odd situation whereby we're talking about a site as an allocation and a site through a separate process as an application. It is purely down to the role of the Greenbelt as stands today, and obviously our role here, considering those exceptional circumstances, to consider the appropriateness of removing it from the Greenbelt through the local plan process, and that being the issue that separates.
Thank you. That can quite often be quite normal. Things running concurrently in relation to planning applications and local plan process, so that's actually quite normal. I thought I had some notes on the policy and the suggested wording changes. I haven't got anything at the moment to go through, so can we move on to policy R22 and have a look at that one, please? So again, if I can ask the council to provide an introduction. This is a much smaller site. If you could provide an introduction again, give the exceptional circumstances for removing that site from the Greenbelt, please.
Thank you, Inspector. So yes, site R22, catchily known as the land adjacent to the A12 Ingatestone. In terms of the site itself, it's further up the road from site R21, so further up on Roman Road. Also, confusingly, there are 2 roads called Roman Road which are joining. So the B1002, I'll call that, is the main road that goes to the north, and then the Roman Road, which is situated on the eastern boundary, and there's a small lane which I think was probably cut off when the A12 was built, but Haybridge Lane, which runs to the south of the site. So the site itself, as it stands, is currently in agricultural use. It's bounded by a significant vegetation around the edges of the perimeter of the site. Access would be onto the, I'd say, the Roman Road on the eastern boundary, and it's well contained, as I'll come on to, in terms of the exceptional circumstances for its release from the Greenbelt. So residential development at site R22 was assessed in the Greenbelt study as having a low moderate impact in terms of achieving Greenbelt purposes overall. Residential development on the site is considered to be appropriate given its location to the south of Ingatestone, a large village. The impact on openness at development of this site would be limited by the hard boundaries of the A12 and Roman Road and the B1002 to the north, as well as Haybridge Lane to the south. Given the limited impact on openness and strong boundaries that contain the site from its rural setting, it's considered that this site has a limited function in terms of achieving Greenbelt objectives, and therefore the specific local level characteristics of the site are considered to justify its selection for release from the Greenbelt.
Thank you. And again, if we can go through a very similar process, looking at the capacity of the site, where the 57 dwellings comes from, and the approach that the council's taken in relation to that. Because obviously it's a higher density that's proposed here at, I think you said it was 46 dwellings per hectare, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Or around that,
yeah, an approximate number. So certainly the site has got a higher density in that respect, but I think obviously it's been informed, and there have been previous pre-application discussions with Carla Holmes in respect of what the potential capacity of that site could be. So certainly it's been updated, informed through that process, and the 57 dwellings is considered to be achievable and appropriate in this location given the other requirements of policy, and that's been agreed through the statement of common ground that we recently submitted as part of the examination. There has, as we may well come on to in terms of the trajectory, obviously there has been a recommendation through the statement of common ground that there is a slight adjustment to that, whereby the early delivery of that is brought back 1 year to 2022-23, recognising the sort of lead-in times that are required. But I'll let Mr. Delafield come on to a bit more detail in terms of what Carla Holmes are progressing in respect of that.
Thank you. That'd be really useful, actually, if I can bring in Mr. Delafield to just explain from your client's perspective the deliverability of this home and the way that it's set out in terms of the capacity, but also in relation to the trajectory.
Yeah, thank you, Inspector.
Thank you.
As Mr. Quilter noted, we began pre-application discussions on this some time ago. I think it was in 2016 we had our first meeting. The application has been progressed since with several iterations to the layout, all of which have been shared with the council through those further meetings. So the design work is well advanced on the planning application. That's supported by technical work, which is also equally well advanced. So really, we're ready to progress the application as the examination advances, and looking to submit the application soon after adoption of the local plan, if not just before.
And does Carla Holmes own the site, or is it still under option? As in, would it be an outline application, or would it be a full application that would come in, or would that be dependent on whatever?
It's under option, but it will be a full application that will be submitted. The intention is to front load as much information as possible to avoid pre-commencement conditions.
And in terms of the deliverability of the numbers, because it's split over 2 years, you feel from your client's perspective that's realistic?
Yes, 17 in the first year and 40 in the second year. Carla Holmes have delivered in excess of 40 dwellings on other sites in the Brentwood area in recent years.
So in relation to submission of a planning application, you're waiting for this plan to be adopted prior to putting that in? Is
yes,
that
or at least a positive letter from the inspectors to say that the plan can be adopted in advance to adoption.
Okay. Thank you. So again, looking at, and I have been to this site, so I have seen it, and the other sites obviously in Ingatestone as well. In relation to any site constraints, any access issues, anything like that, is there anything that could impede sort of bringing this site forward at all? I mean, what is the site currently agricultural? Is that correct, Mr. Quilter? You said it's agricultural at the moment.
That's my understanding. If Mr. Delafield wants to correct me on that, but no,
It's very much. I remember when I went and saw the site. It's very much sort of there's trees and scrub on the boundary, and sort of you could see through where the gateway is into the site. Is it actually still utilised for agricultural uses at the moment? So it's not used for any recreational purposes or anything like that. It's very much agricultural, isn't it? Okay.
It's still agricultural land.
So there's no constraints that you're aware of, no access constraints or anything like that. I will bring in Mr. Johnston just to confirm that. Mr. Johnston, please.
Thank you, Ma'am. Just to say, I haven't seen much in the way of detail. I have had only, believe it or not, phone conversations with the transport consultant for this site. What they would be looking to do is some sort of minor relaxation of the standard, as it were, for the site access in terms of visibility displays. I'm assured, I mean, she's a very fine transport consultant. I know her from many other sites, and I trust her very much. And it does seem as though it's achievable what she's looking to achieve, which would comply with the highway standards required. So on that basis, we don't envisage it being a major issue.
Okay.
But we've got yet to see it in hard evidence, as it were.
I recognise that. It's yeah. Whether an allocation doesn't mean that a site will actually get planning permission or not, and that's something that will obviously be determined by yourselves if and when an application was to come forward. But it's whether we have enough evidence to ensure that this is actually a deliverable site in terms of allocating it at least. So we'll leave that judgment to you later on, subject to us allowing this site to stay in the plan, etc. So thank you for that. That's very useful. Thank you. Mr. Warden, please.
Thank you, Mrs. Wright. On the last site, Ms. Parsons referred to archaeological investigations, and indeed that's in reference to it in policy. As Mr. Quilter says, this site is also on Roman Road, although it might be different element of Roman Road. Does that same archaeological requirement apply to this site, or was it something peculiar to the other site?
Is that question to me, sir?
No, I was referring that you'd made a reference to it on the other site. We've moved on from the other site. I'm referring to this site also being on Roman Road, and I was just asking about whether whether there is a need for an archaeological investigation, and I'm just thinking about in terms of the timing of the pre-application process that has been undertaken, as well as whether the policy clearly should not have that in.
If I can respond to that.
Mr. Delafield, please.
An archaeological investigation has been undertaken on this site, and the findings shared with the county archaeologist. That took the form of trial trenching across the site, and no findings of note were found.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Warden?
Not at this stage, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I do note that there is the suggested inclusion of some wording in relation to potential heritage impact in your F9A amendment policy R22. Is that as a catch-all element? It's not unusual in policies to have a bit of a catch-all.
Yeah, I think again with some of the other ones that we've previously discussed, its origins are from the Historic England comments in respect of making sure that there was that catch-all in effect to cover that.
Okay, but that is something that's going to be looked at, because obviously we do have the heritage policies anyway in place, which we'll be looking at next week. Yes. So that's something that maybe we can have a look at that.
Yeah, that's understandable.
Thank you. So, I mean, Calla Holmes, in your hearing statement, you did raise a query about that in particular, didn't you, about the heritage bit being put in there? I mean, it does, the wording that's put in, at the moment, it's not in the policy. Obviously, that's suggested wording by the council, which doesn't, which we will obviously have a look at. Do you see that that's just not necessary?
We haven't got an issue with the wording. It was just, it would be useful to have some supporting text to clarify whether it was just in relation to the potential for archaeological findings to be found on site, or whether there was a wider heritage issue, because we're not aware of a wider heritage constraint. Council, do you want to just respond on that?
Yes, I think we'll probably have this same issue on other sites that have a similar requirement. I think, again, with the origins from the Historic England comments, I think it could be a case of dealing with that through supporting text, which we'd be happy to present. And I think otherwise it would be, or the other alternative is then relying upon the more general policies in respect of historic environment. But I think in terms of the way that it's presented, we feel that that's appropriate, but obviously we can qualify that.
We'll have a discussion about that when we come to the historic environment element of the part of this session, which will be next week, on next Friday. We can come and have a discussion on exactly how the heritage policies are to be read within the plan, etc. So we'll have a look at that. I think, Mr. Warden, you did have your hand up. Oh, no, it's down again. Right, thank you. Now, in relation to site boundaries, can I just confirm, because I know that Cal Holmes, in your hearing statement, you've stated that whilst you actually say that the boundary of the site is justified, you're not proposing an extension to the site allocation, from what I can tell, but you're talking about there would be a sliver of land that would remain as greenbelt but has no greenbelt purpose. Could you just explain to us which part you mean, and whether you've had that discussion with the council, and whether the council can just comment on that, please? We
have included a plan within our hearing statement. It's a appendix to the hearing statement, which we sought to identify the sliver of land that we're referring to there. It's effectively it's a highway verge, triangle of highway verge between the site boundary and existing properties on the other side of Roman Road. And is this
so you're not proposing that this land is pulled within the site allocation, no, but it could be utilised to provide a footway?
That's correct. Yeah.
Was that your concern? Because there would be a line of sight where people would automatically cross there and want to walk through the highway verge to get across to then go and access the facilities in the village. Is that what you're? That's correct. That's what I seem to glean from your hearing statement.
The location of that footway is shown within the emerging site layout plan that we've included in Appendix A to our hearing statement.
So, can I just ask the council to ask whether you've had a chance to have a look at this, and whether including that part of the land, or this sliver of verge that would remain in the green belt, whether that would be an issue or a concern for yourselves in terms of the long-term nature of greenbelt boundaries, and whether that would impact on bringing forward any potential putting in some form of a footpath across that site at all.
Thank you, Inspector. Apologies, just trying to get to the document, see the map.
It's at the back of their Calla Holmes' hearing statement. I'm sorry, I haven't got the actual number of Calla Holmes' document, because I've actually got it in front of me. But it's just at the back.
I've got the reference number if Mr. Coulter is struggling.
It's G7AD2, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Oh, I see. Right. Okay. Yeah, I know what we're talking about now. No, I think in our view, because obviously when you're looking at the this in conjunction with site E08, which I know we'll be coming on to, this area of land obviously is we appreciate that. I think obviously by its release, I don't think we're talking about any development taking place per se. I don't think it would necessarily prevent a footpath coming forwards if it needs to in terms of any sort of works of that nature. Equally, obviously, bearing in mind that the Greenbelt boundary would equally go further north, that on the other side of Roman Road, continues around the edge of Ingatestone and site E08 as well. So I think it possibly
it sort of wraps around, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So I think it could possibly still serve that purpose, obviously, as part of the surroundings, in our view.
I mean, I don't think, Mr. Delafield, you're not proposing that this is necessary for your development or for your client's development to come forward at all. But I think you were just trying to be helpful in sort of just identifying that. But,
yeah, in our view, we saw the Roman Road B1002 along the northern edge of that green space as the more logical greenbelt boundary.
Okay. Mr. Johnston, please.
Sorry, you are talking about the bit on the northern side of the site, I'm assuming, is that right?
It's on the eastern side of the site.
Oh, sorry, the eastern side of the site.
Yeah, so it's in between the existing properties on the east and the site.
Ah, okay, excuse me.
So there's a sort of verge.
Right, I was just wondering because there's a large swathe of highway land. There's actually quite a large swathe of highway land to the east as well, but
Yes.
I apologise. I was getting my north and east mixed up.
Okay, thank you. I've got nothing further on that site in relation to any discussion. So unless anybody got any particular comments or anything else they wish to say on that site, I'm content to move on to policy E08. Now, this, again, if I can just get the council to do an introduction to the site and just explain their approach for proposing this as a site allocation for employment use, please. And again, exceptional circumstances as to the reasons for removing it from the Greenbelt. Thank you.
Thank you, Inspector. Yes, so this is site E08. Again, naming convention's not great on this one in terms of it called land adjacent to A12 and Slip Road, Ingatestone. I'm sure it'll be named something differently when it comes forward, or if it comes forward. In any case, this site is allocated in the plan for just over 2 hectares of employment land, for principally for B1. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong document there. In terms of the amendments. Sorry, just bear with me. Yeah, sorry. So principally for land within Class E, B2 and B8 development. I think obviously this referring to the Statement of Common Ground, where there's a minor amendment to include reference to C2 use as well, which I'm sure we'll come on to. The site itself is situated again to the southern southwestern edge of Ingatestone. It's joined by the A12 and, as the name suggests, the slip road that comes off southbound onto the B1002 Roman Road, and that road also serves as the southern boundary of the site. So in a similar fashion to the site R21, this is a wedge of lands, a triangle that's bounded on all sides. There is vegetation on the boundaries that provide some buffering already in respect of the site boundary. In respect of the exceptional circumstances, Employment development at site EO8 was assessed in the Greenbelt study as having moderate impact in terms of achieving Greenbelt purposes overall. Employment development on this site is considered to be appropriate given its location to the south of Ingatestone, a large village. The impact on openness of the development would be limited by the hard boundaries of the A12 Slip Road and Rome Road, B1002. That surround it, and given the limited impact on openness and strong boundary that contain the site from the wider rural setting, it's considered the site as it is appropriate in terms of its release from Greenbelt.
Thank you for that. Can we just start in relation to the development proposals for the site, what it actually says in the submitted plan, and then there is a suggested change. Obviously, there's a suggested change in the F9A, but there's also a suggested change now in the statement of common ground that you've made, that's between yourselves and Hallmark Care Homes and RP Gamer. So can I just explain, first of all, why you chose this particular site for Ingatestone for employment use for B1, B2, B8, and any associated employment generating sui generis uses at that time? Obviously, those use class orders don't, or some of those use class orders don't exist anymore, but
Sure.
Can you just explain the council's approach at the beginning?
Yes, of course. So in terms of going back to obviously our strategy for identifying employment growth, I think as we went through in the week one sessions, obviously we have somewhat more limited opportunities of that type of land coming forward in comparison to residential developments. But by any means, obviously trying to follow that same strategy by identifying those sites on the key transport corridors, and this obviously being on that central corridor where there have been relatively limited opportunities for those types of land to come forward. So this site obviously represents an opportunity to provide for employment growth in an area which we feel would benefit from that. Obviously to meet the needs of the borough as a whole, but by all means equally for the Ingatestone as a village, and also just touching quickly upon the emerging neighbourhood plan, which also recognises this site as an employment site, and obviously they have a keen interest in trying to maintain the vitality of the economy in the area. But in terms of the reference to the Brentwood plan, I think obviously it fits with our strategy, and although it represents a fairly modest size site, by no means are we talking a significant as the Enterprise Park, for example, but this obviously offers an opportunity on a key transport network next to the village. Obviously mentioned the train station as well, which would very much complement the existing settlement of Ingatestone.
Just before I move on, because you've just highlighted it again, the emerging neighbourhood plan, can you just explain where that's at in terms of its process? I know it's not very far along, that's my understanding.
Yes, so I think we've set it out in other hearing statements, but they've recently undertaken, I may get the references wrong here, it's Regulation 14 consultation. Yes, sorry. So I think they've recently undertaken that consultation, and obviously then they'll be due to submit that to us for further consideration, and we'll then need to consult on that. So yes, it is at the earlier stage. They'll obviously then, subject to that process, then look to take that to a referendum, obviously going forwards. But very much that process has been by all means has been fast-tracked, subject to the disruptions from last year. I think originally their intention was to go to referendum in May last year, but that was obviously delayed because of the election cycle being disrupted by COVID. So by all means that the neighbourhood planning group is keen to advance that as quickly as possible.
Thank you. So in relation to the suggested changes, if we take the suggested changes now in the statement of common ground, because they really sort of supersede the F9A changes that were originally sort of put forward, could you just talk me through that reasoning and the compatibility of uses, etc.? Because bringing C2 in is very much, is this a housing site? Is it a mixed use site? Is it actually employment? Does this fit in with the submitted plan stating that this is employment only? Well, although it does say any associated employment generating sui generis uses, but obviously C2 isn't a sui generis use, even in the previous format of what the policy said. So could you just explain the council's reasoning as to why this change and whether that impacts on the council's strategy if this is not in its totality an employment site, or potentially?
Yeah, I think obviously coming back to the point about its modest size, I think we recognise obviously the market is going to limit some of the larger scale, particularly like say storage and distribution uses that could potentially take place on that. So obviously that potentially there is still the option for that, obviously. But I think in terms of the flexibility that we're trying to apply to this particular site, given its size, and recognising that there are some complementary uses that could come forward as part of that. I'm happy for Mr. Brailsford to come in on the particulars of their views on the benefits of C2 use in terms of the employment generating aspects of that. Obviously, there are the wider benefits that could bring to the area just in terms of the employment generating uses, appreciating that C2 doesn't come under that bracket per se. But there is obviously some benefits to that. But I'll let Mr. Brailsford explain further in terms of his client's perspective of the site.
If I will bring in Mr. Brailsford, in the meantime, if the council can just, I will come back to the council and just sort of, because I'm trying to understand whether, because in looking at this as another use and taking it as part employment and part housing, you're changing the exceptional circumstances in relation to the release, because the release of this site for employment, the exceptional circumstances may well be different in relation to releasing this site if it's necessary for delivering your housing requirements. And housing requirements obviously includes care home beds. That's part of your supply. That's all included. So if I'll go to Mr. Brailsford first, but if you can have a think about that, or whether you need to just have a think about just responding to that question, because I'm just trying to understand, because this has come in quite late in the day, so I'm just trying to understand whether you're trying to change the allocation which is set out in your submitted plan, which is really you're starting to go down the emission site element, because you're changing what the site is allocated for. So can you just have a think about that? But I will go to Mr. Brailsford first. So Mr. Brailsford, please.
Thank you, Inspector. I think this policy has a long history of discussion with the local planning authority. And particularly going back to Regulation 18 consultation, one of the principles of the policy was a statement that the primary purpose of the allocation is to deliver jobs for the area. So consideration will be given to other uses that enable job opportunities, taking account of market needs. And for reasons which certainly on our side we've never been entirely clear on, when that came to the Regulation 19 version that was published for consultation, that wording had slipped into the reasoned justification of the reasoned justification paragraph 9.226 of the policy. And part of our representations was to say that at that time, if that was the objective of the policy, then the restriction that came in at Reg 19 in respect of other sui generis employment generating development, the two things were inconsistent. So we've worked very closely with Mr. Quilter, Mr. Drain, and looking at this policy. And if its objective is to achieve create job opportunities taking account of market needs, then there needs to be some flexibility there to do what it says on the tin. And the restriction to other sui generis employment generating development didn't quite do that. So with that in mind, the discussions in respect of the statement of common ground have sought to make the intention of the policy clearer, but noting that if there are other uses, that it has to be a use that supports the main principle of employment use on the site and the generation of jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Brailsford. I mean, you're quite right to bring up the paragraph 9.226 in the plan. That was, I'd already noted that before I'd got the statement of common ground, that I wanted to understand what that meant in the justification text, because that's not what the policy reads as. So I'm trying to understand what this policy is trying to, as an employment policy, it makes it very clear it's only for employment uses. If the council wishes it to be for different uses, then we would need some justification as to why this can't be an employment site, or can't be partially an employment site, and whether there can be a mix of uses on this site, considering you've already stated that the size of the site limits some employment use potential operators or users coming forward and using the site. So again, it's that deliverability of this site in relation to what the plan is proposing as submitted. Is that then deliverable? Or does this site actually need to come forward for a different purpose or a different use, or a mix of different uses, to ensure that that again needs to be justified, particularly in Greenbelt terms, whether there's a specific need for the uses that are being proposed. So could the council just clarify? Well, I'll bring Mr. Brailsford back in, and then I'll come back to the council on that.
Thank you. I mean, the discussions that we've had with the local planning authority here from day one have related to the employment generating benefits of care home use. But to be clear, and as we've set out in our hearing statement, the proposal here is one for a mix of uses. It's principally for a headquarters, office, training centre and centre of excellence for Hallmark Care, who have the site secured under a legal option. And without repeating lots of what's in the hearing statement, you'll see that there are a number of companies that come under the Hallmark Care bracket. They are a national operator of 20 care homes, with different companies in offices around Essex, and the objective is to relocate that business to a state-of-the-art headquarters, all under one roof on the Ingatestone site, and for that head office function and centre of excellence function to also exist alongside a state-of-the-art care home, which will be an exemplar in the portfolio, where staff from around the country will come and do training in the head office and see what's going on in the new care home. So it's the changes to the policy were really to ensure that the policy gave the flexibility for the local authority to look at that as it came forward, and to sort of iron out the inconsistency between the policy that had an objective of or reference to supporting uses that generated jobs subject to market need, but as we said, that policy wasn't doing what it said on the tin, whereas the proposed change in the statement of common ground very much provides the opportunity for the council to look at proposals that meet the overall objectives of the policy.
Thank you. When you talk about this potential for a care home, what size are you considering? Or is that still under debate?
No, it's the discussions are very well advanced in terms of the proposal here. We are going through a pre-application process with the council have entered into a planning performance agreement. So I think the details in the hearing statement, but we've got about 1,800 square metres of office space, which will accommodate around 80 employees relocating from other areas, other smaller, older offices within Brentwood and the wider area.
Sorry again, could you just repeat the the floor space for the offices?
So
what was that again?
It's just shy of 1,800 square metres.
Right. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
Which will provide accommodation for around 70 to 80 employees who will relocate from existing offices across Brentwood and the wider Essex area, and it will also future-proof for expansion over the next 5 years with another 20 to 30 employees on top of that. All of those figures are in the hearing statement.
Yes, they are. And in relation to the size of care home,
around 6,800 square metres, generating a further 70 to 80 jobs.
And what sort of bed space would that bring in?
It's 70.
Thank you.
Inspector, if I can, do you want me to come in on the back of what Mr. Browse has explained there from the council's perspective?
Yes, please, Mr. Drain.
I think if I firstly just address the point that we are conscious that this amendment in particular has reached you very recently, and I think that just from our perspective, that's apologies from our side that was not with you sooner. I think it reflects the ongoing discussion that we've had with Mr. Brailsford and colleagues on the specific proposals that are coming forward here, and it really reflects the nature of the proposal that is coming forward specifically from Hallmark Group and as Mr. Brailsford has described, the opportunity to bring forward something that is predominantly and very much led by employment uses in terms of the buildings that would be on site and the HQ building and associated buildings that would be very much employment generating uses for employment uses. The fact that the company, our care home provider, therefore wanting to provide a care home as part of that offer on site, and indeed the fact that the specific offer is very much nuanced towards the need for the care home and HQ facility to be related to each other in some way in terms of that is their business and the training opportunities that come with that. It really has been a reflection on our part to try and be specific with the policy to allow for what we consider to be very much beneficial uses that would go on site that would certainly generate large amounts of employment, as Mr. Browse has set out, but in a way that's consistent with the nature of the business that would be there. So very much appreciating the nuance, and indeed it has been part of the pre-application discussion already about the difference between CT use and employment use, but noting really that the care home provision on that site is related to the employment uses and indeed generates employment itself, notwithstanding the difference in planning uses. So we would consider this to be predominantly and led by employment uses, and the care home element being part of this specific proposal because of the specific opportunity that's before us.
So in relation to the proposed wording that's set out in the Statement of Common Ground, can you just explain the other proposed uses within that and whether, for instance, you've got C1, which is hotels, and whether that's necessary to be in there, because obviously it's not in the submitted plan. So can you just explain that? Obviously, yes, hotels are, and we're not saying that employment sites are the only it's not just employment sites that are job creating. Retail and service sector, and as you said, care homes and hotels, etc. All that element is all creating jobs. I suppose I'm trying to just understand what the policy is trying to achieve and what is necessary for soundness, if it is necessary for soundness, to change to policy E08. So if C1, if a hotel's not proposed on the site, because what I seem to be hearing is that these changes are happening to the policy because of the specific requirements that have been put forward to you. So is there a requirement for a hotel on the site as well?
No, thank you, Inspector. Sorry, I would need to slightly check that. Mr. Brailsford may well come in with further, but our view is that the employment uses as proposed along with the care home facility would not necessarily require C1. So I'm agreeing with you there. I'm not sure if Mr.
And you've got
Brailsford
F1 down there, which comes into the educational aspects of
I think
Mr. Brailsford's proposal.
Yeah, and I think generally this is where the nature of trying to provide some element of flexibility whilst making sure that the policy is employment led for employment generating uses. This comes back to also discussions that have been had locally through, for instance, the neighbourhood plan and aspirations to utilise this site to create jobs, and that being predominantly what it's about, job creation, and the difficulty of sometimes aligning use classes within the nature of as you've set out, the many things that can provide for jobs. So the training facility element, really coming back to that F1 use specifically. I may need to double check on the C1 element.
Mr. Brailsford, I don't know if you can give any enlightenment to some of these aspects at all.
I'm guessing it hasn't come from us, but I think it's probably carried over from the draft neighbourhood plan, which I think the relevant extract is appended to my hearing statement, but that does suggest a very broader range of acceptable land uses on that site. So my guess would be that it sort of has its origins in that neighbourhood plan policy, but our point here is very clear that as we see it, that the policy as drafted in the submitted plan didn't give sufficient flexibility to deliver what is a very high employment generating scheme that Hallmark are bringing forward on this site, which is very much centred around the headquarters office and centre of excellence. You mentioned a point earlier about the sort of the relationship between the care home and the headquarters office, and I think this is spelt out in the hearing statement, but it is envisaged that, for instance, out of the 20 plus care homes that Hallmark have in their portfolio, managers will come to the head office centre of excellence. They will train there, they will do practical training in the adjacent care home, so it is very much integral to the headquarter and centre of excellence provision. And what the discussions that we've obviously been having with Mr. Coulter and Mr. Drain is that what we can't have is a policy that would preclude that, and the agreements that we've made on amendments to the policy are ones which we are comfortable with in terms of not precluding what's coming forward.
I was just about to say, can I ask the council to have a think about this policy in a little bit more detail, please? Mr. Shadaravian.
I'm looking at this with fairly fresh eyes, and looking at it now, it doesn't do the job it's intended to do in any event, because if it's intended that there be several primary uses taking place on the site, including use within C2 and F1, then it seems to me that they're not subsidiary employment generating uses, but
that's my concern. It's not setting it out correctly.
They are primary uses, and so if the policy is to be amended, then it ought to be amended by referring to all of the primary uses which are going to take place or might take place there, and so should extend to the normal employment uses, and also specify the C2 and F1 elements with a proper explanation in the supporting text as to why those elements are included exceptionally on an employment site. And I think that would work. However, in terms of the justification for it and the issue of exceptional circumstances, bearing in mind that ordinarily a Class B8 use might not generate very much employment at all, we're talking here about a highly intensive form of development that would give rise to a fairly highly intensive employment user, in a sense of it having many employees on the site, exercising their various functions in each of the employment generating elements. So in terms of meeting the employment strategy of the plan, it would serve to reinforce that and meet those requirements, notwithstanding the slight derogation by including the C2 and F1 elements.
Thank you. Yes, I totally agree with you there, Mr. Shadaravian. B8 quite often is very land hungry, but only doesn't produce many jobs at all. But it's obviously a very important requirement.
Of course.
But it's just very land hungry and doesn't bring in the jobs. Whereas other employment uses, as you said, brings in the jobs. Mr. Drain, please.
Thank you, Inspector. If I may, just considering where this may have come from, I suspect, thinking through the use class order changes in particular, which obviously we responded to you about last year when they came in, and thinking through the main modifications, it may be a drafting error that there's been some misunderstanding of the new use classes. If you will allow us, I think it would be best if we go away and just have a look at that and make sure that we are presenting you with something that is accurate and considered.
If you can go back to the original, the submitted E08, and just take it from there, I think that would be
exactly.
Well, ignore F9A.
Ignore F9A.
And ignore the statement of common ground in that respect, because we need to revert back to the submitted policy. Yeah.
That too.
That'd be very useful.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Warden, please.
Thank you. It's probably irrelevant now because Mr. Shadavian is going to ignore F9A. But my point was about the first point, the development principles, which proposals should provide employment that delivers job opportunities. I'd have thought that was, I don't know, employment that doesn't provide job opportunities. So I think that if you're ditching that now, then that's fine. But if you were looking at it, then I'd ask you to look at that text again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. A very fair point there. All I wanted to do just before we finish, because we are coming to the close on discussions on this site now, is I wanted to just understand the access arrangements, because I know that this site is between literally a rock and a hard place, literally, because you've got the A12 on one side and then you've got the slip road coming off the A12, and then you've obviously got a road to the south. So can I just have an understanding from a transport and access perspective that this is a deliverable site in that context, whether that's Mr. Johnston or whether Mr. Brailsford, you've got anything in particular that you want to bring to my attention from that aspect? Oh, sorry, you're on mute, Mr. Brailsford. Sorry, it is a Friday afternoon, don't worry.
Only to say that there have been discussions with highways officers over the last, I think, 5 years that we've been looking at this site. The principle of the access, there's nothing to get excited about there. Good visibility displays, certainly undeliverable in highways terms. One of the at a very early stage, we submitted a statement of deliverability to the council in early 2017, which included an initial highway technical note, and similarly, albeit on a slightly different scheme, there were discussions with the County Council Highways Department last year on a pre-app basis, which I think concluded that this was the right location for the access to the site.
Thank you, Mr. Brailsford. Mr. Johnston, please.
Thank you, Ma'am. Yeah, just to confirm, really, I mean, the Highway Authority did express concerns about this site a while back in terms of access because of its very nature. It's almost like an island, really. So we were concerned about access for all users and such like. It just so happens that Hallmark have approached Brentwood, and I've seen some documents just in this last week regarding more pre-app. So I have seen a document and made preliminary points, because I think there was supposed to be a meeting going on this week between the development management team in Brentwood and Hallmark. And it does look like a suitable access can be achieved with pedestrian access as well. So on that basis, we're relatively satisfied that a suitable access can be achieved.
Thank you for that. That's very useful. Mr. Brailsford, you still got your hand? Is that a new comment, or is it your hand still up? Thank you. Mr. Shadravian, you've got your hand up. Right, okay. So no further comments on that. Well, I've got nothing further in relation to site E or policy E08. So unless anybody has anything they wish to comment on in relation to the 3 sites that we've discussed for Ingatestone, I'm proposing to close this session. So I can't see any hands up. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for participating. You've given us some food for thought, and I know that the council is going to have a look at that policy in particular. In relation to that point of looking at that policy, any idea when you may come back to us on that? Just Monday, so that we can understand when we're going to be looking at it.
I can deal with it by Monday.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you. Thank you very much then, ladies and gentlemen, and we will see, well, certainly the council team again, we'll see you on Wednesday now, because obviously we're not having the Matter 8 on Tuesday. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.